the least racist person there is anywhere in the world. What I've done for African Americans, no president, I would say, has done. Now, I'll say this. They are so happy because I get the calls. And the African American community is so thankful. They've called me and they said, finally, somebody is telling the truth.
The whole community was on a conference call for that. Thanks. But anyway, now to hear the president talk about himself and his relationship with Black Americans sounds like he equates himself almost to a civil rights leader. He even tweeted more praise of himself today, saying it's appropriate that the 3-year anniversary of his inauguration is coming on MLK Day, adding African American unemployment is the lowest in the history of our country, by far also best poverty, youth, and unemployment numbers ever. Great. But polling of African Americans tells a much different story. In a poll that came out in the last couple of days here, Black Americans by the Washington Post said, and Ipsos conducted this along with them, 83% of Black Americans say they think Trump is a racist. The same 83% say they think Trump has made racism a bigger problem in this country than it was before his presidency. 89% say it's important that Trump not win a second term in the White House, and 90% say they disapprove of his performance as president. Richard, no, but he touts economic numbers, and those numbers are real, okay? We can dig into them a little bit more, but my point is, when he does that, doesn't he do himself more harm than good with communities of color when he says, basically, you owe me thanks?
Well, if you remember initially where the president got in some heat where he said, you know, you have nothing to lose by voting for me. And it's the way you carry the message. I mean, obviously he meant that if things aren't working out with the other candidates, vote for me and see how things work out. But it didn't come across that way. And to his credit, he's done a lot of great things that helped African Americans. Opportunity zones, which is economic investment in urban areas. He signed a permanent act providing permanent funding to HSBCUs. The criminal justice reform, we haven't seen that in over 30 years. And the last time we saw that, we had 2 million Americans in jail, and that was during the Clinton administration as a result of him signing criminal justice reform. In the 90s, that led to a lot of incarceration of African Americans. So to his credit, there's a lot of things that he did positive.
He did, obviously, anybody remember Central Park 5? They'd be dead right now if they listened to a full-page ad he took out when they were exonerated later. And obviously, he delegitimized the last president, or attempted to, with a false smear. How would you have answered that same question? Do you believe this president's a racist?
So here's the thing. If you go back to the campaign trail, I believe his statement was, "Where's my African American?" So we'll just start at that point. When you talk about what happened with HBC.
And what the Reverend's referenced at a rally, yes, he was looking for any person of color, and he asked for where his black supporter was.
So in contrast to what happened with HBCUs, there was a gathering of presidents from HBCUs, historical black colleges, universities in America, who were given the impression that they were going to come to this gathering and receive some sort of support from this president and this administration. They received absolutely the reverse of that. So the timing of his decision to do something on behalf of HBCUs coincides with the numbers that were presented here before. In terms of the African Americans, he continually refers to us as a group, as a monolith, as a one entity that somehow he has, in a Messiah posture, saved and delivered like the children of Israel. Add my number to the 89% who views him that way.
You've made a professional career out of dealing with racism, hate crimes, etc. We've talked about the tone in this country that people feel. Same question to you. If you were answering that poll question, how would you answer?
I think that's something that only Donald Trump can answer, but what I can clearly say is that he's a very divisive figure. And when you have a president, the whole point of a president is to unite the country, to strengthen the country, not to leave it weaker than when you got there. So there will be things that he's done and that we'll be able to look back at and say, okay, well, this was an accomplishment, this was done well. But they'll be overshadowed by the fact that at every opportunity he divides people, and he divides them across as many different ways he can find. Any difference that exists, he will try to exploit it. And I personally think it's because when he's criticized, he doesn't like that very well. He loves calling people names. He likes to call you little Marco, but when things aren't going well for him, when he's not the biggest, the best, whether it's the crowd size at the inauguration, he has a problem dealing with that.
Same question to you, Jerika.
Well, I find the poll interesting. I think I agree with a lot of the sentiments in the poll itself. You know, I take issue with some of the accomplishments that Richard laid out with respect to the president. When we are talking about opportunity zones, we also need to acknowledge that that started under President Barack Obama. So it's wonderful that he continued something that was established by someone else, but he didn't bring anything new there. And then even when we're looking at criminal justice reform, a lot of it was because there was work across the aisle on the Democratic side. And if we just look at President Trump, when you look at HBCUs, I'm a proud graduate of Spelman College, oftentimes he changes course after he receives criticism. So he didn't come out the gate pushing these policies. He was challenged, and then he wants to, as the Reverend said, wave his hand in the air like he's the Messiah.
Well, we are in election year, and when we come back, black voters may very well be the key to determining who the Democratic nominee will be this year, and turnout may decide who wins in November. So, which candidates are resonating with black voters while others remain all but anonymous?